Chapter 1. A Bargain of Broken Things. Fairy tales, Elara had come to learn, were the cruelest of lies. The pain of them cut deeper for having once been believed. They had been her only refuge since she was a child, these whispered stories of common girls rescued from destitution by handsome princes, of quiet magic transforming the hopelessly ordinary into the breathtakingly extraordinary. The scent of old parchment and pressed flowers clung to the pages of the worn books she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard, a secret world she would enter by candlelight. Growing up on the fringes of the Silverwood conclave, she had clung to the foolish, gossamer hope that a kind fate might one day look upon her. That someday the deep, aching emptiness of her womb would quicken with life. That the shame of her barrenness, a word spat at her like a curse by the mate who had cast her off, would finally transform into the quiet joy of motherhood. But hope, she now knew, was a treacherous and double-edged thing. When it is finally crushed, you suffer not just the pain of your bleak circumstances, but the lingering ache of having dared to dream at all. The day the fairy tales died for good was the day the tax collector came to their cottage. His golden eyes, predatory and sharp, shone in the gloom of their small home, his huge, fur-cloaked body blocking the pale afternoon sun from the doorway. Elara watched from the shadows of the hearth as her father held Lyra tight against his chest, a protective gesture that was as much for show as it was for comfort. He was shielding her younger sister as if the sovereign's commander might lunge and grab her at any moment, a fear that wasn't far from the truth. "The taxes have doubled this season," the commander's voice rumbled, a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards, "by order of High Sovereign Kaelen." Elara's father trembled, a tremor that ran through his entire body. Like everyone in their village of Oakhaven, human and shifter alike, he was terrified of the sovereign. Stories of Kaelen's cold cruelty were whispered over hearth fires and in taverns, tales of how even other wolves, alphas in their own right, feared the chilling stillness of his gaze. At least shifters had some small protection under the laws of the conclave. Humans were seen as little more than property, servants to be used and discarded at a whim. And Elara, she was considered something worse than human. Born to two shifter parents, yet unable to summon the wolf within her, she was a frustrating anomaly, a glitch in the bloodline. She was her family's shame twice over. First, for being wolfless, a constant walking reminder of their diluted strength. Then, for being barren, cast off by her mate after 5 long, hopeful, and ultimately fruitless years of trying to conceive. Her father had taken her back with a bitter reluctance that soured the air between them, another mouth to feed with no dowry to show for her years away. The village whispered that her defects ran deeper than anyone had known, a rotten core hidden beneath a plain face. "My lord," her father's voice cracked, thin and reedy, "we've had a poor harvest. The rains came too late. If you could only grant us more time." "You know the penalty for failing to pay." The commander's eyes, cold as winter gold, fixed on Lyra, who whimpered and pressed her face deeper into their father's tunic. "The sovereign requires new servants for the castle. This one will do nicely." Elara's body went rigid, a cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through her. Everyone knew what happened to the servants taken for High Sovereign Kaelen. They disappeared behind the high, dark walls of his castle and were never seen or heard from again. "But she's promised to be mated," their father protested, his voice rising in desperation. "She has a strong wolf. She'll bear powerful cubs for the conclave." He stopped abruptly, his argument faltering. Elara's heart sank like a stone in a deep well, as his gaze darted to where she stood in the shadows, an unspoken calculation flickering across his face. "Take my eldest daughter instead." The commander sneered, a cruel twist of his lips. "You offer the sovereign a defective half-breed?"
"She's already proven useless for breeding," her father said, and each word was a physical blow to Elara, striking her harder than any fist. Her own mate cast her off. She's perfect for a slave, practically human already, and barren besides. No loss to the conclave. No loss to the conclave, the commander repeated the words slowly, tasting their cruelty. But then what gain to the sovereign? Lyra blurted out, then shrank back as the commander's sharp glance fell upon her. Beautiful stories. Elara closed her eyes for a brief, searing moment. How many times had they mocked her for her storytelling? They called it a shameful human habit, a frivolous waste of time beneath the dignity of their kind. Yet now, in their desperation, they offered it up like a rare prize, the only flicker of value they could find in their broken, disappointing daughter. "Show him, Elara." Her father's hand clamped down on her arm, his grip bruising. He shoved her forward, forcing her to her knees on the rough-hewn floor. Elara lifted her head, a bitter clarity hardening her features. At least as a slave, she thought, the idea a shard of ice in her heart, no one will expect me to bear children I can never give them. "I would be honored to serve High Sovereign Kaelen in any way he wishes, my lord," she said, her voice clear and steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. The commander studied her for a long, unnerving time. There was something calculating in his gaze that made her skin crawl, as if he were weighing her not as a person, but as a pawn in a game she couldn't comprehend. Finally, he nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture. "Very well. The defective one will do." Outside, the commander shifted, his human form melting away into that of a massive wolf, its dark fur gleaming like polished obsidian in the afternoon sun. As they left her village behind, a cloud of dust rising from the wolf's powerful strides, Elara did not look back. She didn't look back at the cottage, at her sister's fleeting guilt, or her father's profound relief. She had learned long ago that the only escape that ever truly mattered was the one you built yourself, word by careful word. Tonight, in the cold darkness of a castle cell, she would imagine a story. A story where her family wept for her, where her sister fought for her, where her father was consumed by regret for his choice. A story where being different didn't mean being broken, and where a woman's worth wasn't measured by the fruitfulness of her womb. She was good at making up happy endings, especially because they never, ever came true. Chapter 2. The Gilded Cage. When the sun finally broke the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and rose, Elara caught her first glimpse of High Sovereign Kaelen's castle. It was nothing like the grim, menacing fortress she had imagined. It rose against the bright morning sky, its towers of white marble so pure they seemed to shine from within. It was more stunningly beautiful than anything her mind, a mind that built worlds from words, could have ever conjured. Yet its flawless, pristine appearance made a deep-seated anxiety stir within her. She knew from her stories that the most breathtaking beauty often hid the darkest, most terrible secrets. The commander who had brought her shifted back into his human form at the castle gates, his hand grabbing her arm in a rough, impatient grip. "Move," he ordered, his voice devoid of any emotion. He led her not through the grand gilded entrance, but down a narrow, winding side path that descended beneath the castle's foundations. They entered through a small iron-banded servant's door, plunging into the deep underground of the fortress. They came to a chilly stone chamber where 5 other girls huddled together on a cold bench, their faces pale with a shared, silent terror. Elara kept her own face a careful, blank mask. She would not let them, or anyone, see her fear. "Strip." The command came from a stern-faced woman with hair the color of iron filings and piercing amber wolf eyes. The girls hesitated, clutching the rough-spun fabric of their dresses. "You are the sovereign's property now," the woman snapped, her voice as sharp as broken glass. "What you thought was yours, including your dignity, now belongs to him." One by one, they removed their clothes, shivering in the damp, cold air. Elara moved with methodical grace, folding her worn dress neatly, refusing to show the humiliation that burned beneath her skin.
Into the washing chamber. The woman, who they would come to know as Griselda, directed them next. They were herded into another room where grim-faced servants doused them with buckets of ice-cold water. Elara gasped as the first shock of it hit her, the brutal cold stealing her breath. Rough, calloused hands scrubbed every inch of her skin with coarse lye soap until it felt raw and scraped. Her hair was washed twice, then combed out with a painful indifference that brought tears to the eyes of the girl next to her. "The sovereign will not have the filth of the villages in his castle," Griselda explained, watching their discomfort with a look of detached enjoyment. "Though I doubt any of you will last the month. You are hardly the beauties he usually prefers." One of the younger girls began to cry silently, her shoulders shaking. "Save your tears," Griselda sneered. "High Sovereign Kaelen is not known for his mercy. Learn your place quickly, or you will learn the meaning of punishment." They were given plain, scratchy shifts of dull gray to wear, and then subjected to a litany of castle rules. Who they were permitted to speak to? No one. Where they were not to go? Everywhere. And the swift, severe consequences of disobedience. Tonight, Griselda's voice dropped, taking on a conspiratorial tone that made Elara's stomach knot with dread. "One of you will have the honor of serving the sovereign's special guest." The way she paused on the words "special guest" sent a fresh wave of terror through the room. Images, dark and violent, flashed through Elara's mind. Being thrown to a pit of hungry wolves, offered as some sort of blood sacrifice to a forgotten god. "The sovereign himself will select which of you receives the honor," Griselda concluded, looking them over as a butcher might inspect a row of carcasses. "You will be presented to him shortly. Try not to embarrass yourselves." They were led up a narrow, winding staircase to a small antechamber with a floor of polished black marble that reflected their frightened faces like a dark mirror. Told to line up and keep their eyes downcast, they waited in a tense, suffocating silence. From beyond a set of heavy oak doors came the sound of approaching footsteps, heavy and measured. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly, the air growing thick and charged with an almost tangible power. Griselda, who had been tormenting them with her authority only moments before, went rigid, her earlier confidence evaporating like mist. A rough hand pressed down on the back of Elara's neck, forcing her head lower until her chin touched her chest. "His Majesty, High Sovereign Kaelen," a voice announced from the doorway. The marble floor beneath Elara's bare feet seemed to vibrate with each step he took as he moved into the room. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, on the swirling gray patterns in the stone, but the air grew heavy, pressing against her skin like a physical touch. It was an aura of absolute, unquestionable power. "The new arrivals, Your Majesty," said a male voice, tight with deference, "for your special guests' requirements." A long, drawn-out silence followed. Elara could hear the shallow, frightened breathing of the girls beside her. One of them was trembling so violently that Elara could feel the vibrations through the floor. "They're all cowering," came a deep voice, a voice that resonated through Elara's very bones. It held neither cruelty nor compassion, just a weary, profound disappointment, as though this display was exactly what he had expected. Something in that voice, its casual power, its inherent command, made it impossible for Elara not to look. In all the fairy tales she had hoarded and secretly read by candlelight, kings and princes were described with such sweeping grandeur. She had always wondered if real royalty could possibly live up to the heroes of legend. Despite her fear, a lifetime of curiosity won out.
Slowly, deliberately, against every instinct for self-preservation that screamed at her to stay hidden, she raised her eyes. What she saw made every literary hero in her memory fade into a pale, flimsy imitation. High Sovereign Kaelen wasn't merely handsome. He was sublime, in a way that made her storyteller's mind scrambled for comparisons and find none adequate. Broader than her village's alpha, with high cheekbones that could have been carved from ice and lips that held a natural mocking curve, he possessed a savage beauty that no artist could ever hope to truly capture. But it was his eyes that held her. Gods, there was something ancient and feral and deeply lonely living in those eyes. And suddenly, those very eyes snapped to hers. Elara jerked her gaze back to the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Your Majesty," prompted the attendant, "have you made your selection?" Elara felt, rather than saw, his attention still fixed on her, a physical weight that pinned her in place. "She'll do," he said simply, his voice a low murmur that sealed her fate. She knew, without looking up, that he was pointing at her. Chapter 3. The Storyteller and the Beast. Elara stood before a massive door of ancient oak, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The air in this corridor felt colder, as if winter itself clung to the stones, refusing to let go. Torches in iron sconces flickered eerily, their flames seeming to bend away from the door, as if they too were trying to escape what lay beyond. Next to her, the stern servant woman, Griselda, smirked, though Valara noticed her hands shook slightly. "Please the sovereign's guest, however he desires," she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss. "Or tomorrow you will face something far worse." Her voice faltered on the word guest, betraying a fear she tried to conceal. The guard at the door looked nervous too, his broad forehead slick with sweat despite the corridor's chill. When his eyes met his, he looked away quickly, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword until his knuckles were white. From inside the room, a sound echoed, something between a low growl and a pained sigh that seemed to resonate through the very wood of the door. The guard's grip whitened further. Without another word, he unlatched the heavy bolt and pushed Elara into the room. It was more than a room, it was a vast, sprawling suite. The air inside was thick and heavy, a heady mix of exotic scents, warm spices, wilting flowers, and something wilder, more primal beneath it all. Musk, the faint coppery tang of old blood, and the sharp ozone scent of magic. A tall, silver-framed mirror caught Elara's eye, but when she turned to face it, her reflection wavered and distorted, as though reluctant to take her shape in this place. She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. Is anybody there?" she asked, her voice a small, trembling thing in the cavernous space. Someone was watching. She felt it, an unseen gaze as heavy and real as a physical touch. In the deep shadows that clung to the corners of the room, something moved, a flicker of motion at the very edge of her sight. She took a hesitant step forward, then another. A long table dominated the center of the room, laden with a banquet fit for a king. Roasted meats glistening with herbs, bowls of colorful exotic fruits she couldn't name, and golden candelabras casting a dim, flickering light that only seemed to make the dark corners deeper. Elara didn't touch anything. Instead, she moved toward the back of the room, drawn to a set of thick velvet curtains the color of dried blood. Pulling them back, she stopped cold. A huge bed filled the space, absurdly wide, and covered with sheets of black silk. The setup was brutally clear now, the knowing, cruel looks from the servants, the uneasy guard, the lavish meal, and this gigantic bed. Good gods, she was to be used. She was expected to lie with this special guest, to offer her body to whomever or whatever the sovereign hosted here. Her stomach lurched violently, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting back a wave of nausea. But then, a package resting atop the silken sheets caught her eye. It was wrapped in dark paper, and on it a small card bore her name, Elara, scrolled in an elegant looping script. With dread pooling in her gut, she unwrapped the parcel. A gown spilled into her hands, the fabric a deep midnight dark, shimmering with thread of gold embroidery. It was beautiful, horrifyingly so, like a shroud made of starlight. The air in the room dropped to an icy chill, as though darkness itself was swallowing all warmth. A sound echoed from behind her, slow, deliberate footsteps, the scrape of claws on stone, the sickening pop and shift of joints, and a low, menacing groan that was quickly stifled. Elara turned, her heart in her throat. The shadows in the room seemed to have thickened, coalescing into a void that swallowed the candlelight.
"Put it on," a voice then commanded. It was deep, inhuman, and vibrated through her bones. It was language, but language forced through a throat not meant for human speech. Swallowing hard, she retreated behind a dressing screen, her fingers fondling with the gown's intricate fastenings. The fabric slithered over her skin like cool water. On the vanity, she found a necklace waiting, a collar of diamond stars. Should I wear this, too?" she whispered into the silence. There was a pause. Then, closer now, a single word. Yes. Elara clasped it around her throat. Its weight was suffocating. She stepped out from behind the screen. The dining room seemed empty, but the oppressive presence remained. "Please, eat." She hesitated before selecting a small piece of bread, her fingers barely trembling. The rich, buttery flavor turned to ash in her mouth. Behind her, something moved. A shadow, immense and distorted, fell across the table. "Do you like the dress?" "Yes," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Her knees wobbled as she obeyed, pushing herself to her feet. The creature moved forward, just enough for its hand to enter the circle of candlelight. Except it wasn't a hand. It was a massive, grotesque appendage with long, gnarled fingers that ended in sharp, yellowed claws. "Turn around," the beast said. She did so, slowly. Her gaze traveled upward, past the clawed hand, up a misshapen arm, over a broad, heaving chest, and upward still. The sight was staggering. Before her stood a figure too massive, too distorted for this world. Its muzzle bristled with jagged, broken teeth, its body twisted in a way that spoke of constant agony and simmering fury. Its eyes, however, glowed with a sorrowful, intelligent golden light. Alara's lips parted, a scream building deep within her chest. But instead of a cry of terror, what slipped out was a question born from 1,000 stories. "Were you cursed?" The beast recoiled as if she had struck it with a hot iron. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, horrified by her own impertinence. That was presumptuous. "No." The voice was quieter now, stripped of its menace, almost resigned. "How did you know?" She hesitated, her fear momentarily forgotten, replaced by the familiar comfort of narrative. I've read many stories about curses. There was one about a royal family twisted into brambles by a jealous witch, and another about a prince forced to live as a raven. And she stopped herself, cheeks flushing. "I'm rambling." "No." The beast's golden gaze locked onto hers. "Go on." So she did, one tale, then another, speaking of monsters and spells, of humanity hidden beneath horror. She spoke for hours, her voice filling the silent, cavernous room. The candles guttered low, their flames drowning in pools of wax. "Thank you for your company," it rumbled at last, its voice softer now, almost reluctant. Relief, pure and overwhelming, flooded through her. It hadn't been so terrible. She had survived the night,
with the only currency she had ever truly possessed: stories. "Then, will you be my wife?" Elara's breath stilled in her lungs. I cannot," she whispered, horrified. The beast rose to its full, towering height. "Then I have no use for you," it said, the finality in those words sending a shard of ice through Elara's veins. Would the sovereign have her executed for displeasing his monstrous companion? Panic clawed at her throat. But in that moment, her storyteller's mind, her only shield and only weapon, worked faster than her fear. "I am held by those who cannot touch me, broken by those who never speak me, and kept by those who never sought me. Kings command me, but I command fate. What am I?" The beast paused, its massive head tilting slightly. "What is this?" it growled, confused. "A riddle," Elara said, her voice steadier now. "From a story I know." She lifted her chin, summoning every ounce of courage she possessed. "If you can solve this riddle, then I will be yours," she told the beast. "And if you cannot, then until you do, I hope you will allow me to return to tell you more stories." The creature stared at her for what felt like an eternity, its golden eyes seeming to peer into her very soul. Then, to her astonishment, it let out a long, slow exhale that was almost a sigh. "Tomorrow night," it rumbled. "Do not be late." Chapter 4: The King by Day, the Beast by Night. When Elara returned to the servants' quarters in the gray light of dawn, the room fell instantly silent. The other girls, wide-eyed and pale, watched her cross the cold stone floor, pressing themselves against the walls as if she carried a contagious disease. Griselda, the head servant with the iron-gray hair, grabbed Elara's arm with surprising strength, her fingers digging into her flesh like talons. She pulled her into a small, shadowed alcove, away from the others' prying eyes. "You're alive," she hissed, her face a mask of disbelief and suspicion. "How?" She cut herself off, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Say nothing to anyone, not a word. Do you understand? The sovereign will see you at noon." Elara nodded, her arm throbbing where the woman gripped it. She noted how Griselda's fingers trembled despite her stern, commanding demeanor. Her survival had clearly shaken the castle's grim, established order. Sleep was elusive, her dreams haunted by intelligent amber eyes and unanswerable riddles. She was jolted awake by rough hands shaking her shoulder. The sun was already high in the sky. A guard stood over her, his face unreadable beneath his polished helmet. "The sovereign demands your presence," he stated flatly. "Now." She followed him through a labyrinth of corridors and up unfamiliar spiraling staircases, arriving not in the grand throne room she had expected, but in a private, sun-drenched study, its walls lined with books from floor to ceiling. Inside, High Sovereign Kaelen stood silhouetted against a massive arched window. Only two others were present: Griselda, who meticulously avoided making eye contact with Elara, and a powerfully built man with the calm, watchful eyes of a warrior, likely the sovereign's commander. Kaelen's gaze tracked her as she entered, studying her with a cold, unnerving calculation. Up close, in the clear light of day, the beauty that had struck her before seemed sharper, more dangerous. Not a single imperfection marred his features, as if the gods themselves had carved him from marble and then forgotten to breathe any warmth or humanity into him. "So," he began, his voice a disquieting mix of velvet and steel, "you met my guest. What did you think?" Elara lowered her gaze, bowing her head slightly. "He was generous to me, Your Majesty, as were you, for choosing me for his service." A flicker of something, curiosity, or was it suspicion, crossed Kaelen's perfect face. "And that is all you have to say?" he probed, his tone light but insistent. "His Majesty's guest has requested my presence again tonight," she answered softly, keeping her head down, her eyes fixed on the intricate patterns of the rug. Kaelen moved closer, his presence almost predatory, eclipsing the sunlight from the window. "And will you go?" he asked, a mocking smile playing on his lips. "If it pleases your majesty." "I am indifferent to whether you or another entertain that thing," he said, the word dripping with disdain. Elara couldn't hide her flinch at the word. Kaelen noticed it instantly. "Does my choice of words disturb you, slave?" He leaned in, his voice a low, dangerous murmur. "What word would you use to describe such a horrid beast?" The room tensed. The commander shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. Griselda paled. "Your Majesty may, of course, use whichever words he pleases," Elara responded carefully, her heart hammering. A heavy silence followed. Then, impulsively, she added, "Although even beasts, I think, are allowed some measure of respect." The commander gasped softly. Griselda looked as if she might faint. "Respect," Kaelen sneered, his dark pupils narrowing to pinpricks. "That beast is a dark stain upon my castle, a blight upon my name. I allow it enough respect by keeping it alive and fed." Elara bowed lower, staying silent as Kaelen circled her, each step slow and measured, like a wolf stalking its prey. "The gown, the jewels, return them to Griselda," he ordered. "Everything in this castle belongs to me, and I will not allow a mere slave such luxury." She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "And should you speak to anyone?
He studied her for a moment longer, his eyes cold and unreadable. Then, with a dismissive wave of his hand, he said, "Get her out of my sight." That night, as the castle fell into a deep, profound darkness and silence, Elara was led once more toward the ancient oak door. This time, the guard didn't meet her eyes at all. Chapter 5. A Library and a Confession. Days melted into weeks, and Elara's life settled into a strange, bifurcated rhythm. Nights were spent in the candlelit chambers of the beast, and days were filled with the grueling, thankless duties of a castle slave. Each evening followed the same pattern. A beautiful new gown, more exquisite than the last, awaited her. A feast was laid out on the long table, and she would tell her stories until the candles burned low, their flames dancing in the beast's golden eyes. "What tale do you have for me tonight, storyteller?" the beast would rumble, settling his massive, misshapen form into the reinforced chair across from her. She would weave her fantastical stories, always careful to leave them unfinished, a thread hanging for the next night. "And then?" he would press as she paused. "Tomorrow," she would promise, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "I will tell you tomorrow." By day, her life was altogether different. Though Griselda permitted her to sleep later than the other servants, by noon she was on her hands and knees scrubbing endless stone floors, her fingers raw from lye soap and icy water. "You missed a spot," Griselda would say, her voice sharp as she pointed to an invisible imperfection on the gleaming flagstones. "Start again." The other servants, their initial curiosity having curdled into something uglier, avoided her. They whispered as she passed, their words like stinging insects. "Disease carrier," hissed a kitchen maid. "That's why it hasn't killed her yet." "She thinks she's better than us now," an older servant muttered to another, "with her special duties." The whispers followed her constantly, a poison she learned to ignore. Being alone was nothing new. She had been isolated her entire life. Occasionally, she would encounter High Sovereign Kaelen in the corridors. Sometimes he ignored her entirely, his gaze passing over her as if she were a piece of furniture. Other times, his perfect lip would curl in a sneer of disgust. "Still alive, I see," he remarked once, his voice cutting. "My guest must have peculiar tastes." Her days were bleak, but her nights, Elara grew to almost cherish. After weeks of borrowing tales from the handful of books she'd read, however, her repertoire began to run thin. I'm not sure I have a story for you tonight, she admitted one evening, her voice laced with apology. The beast tilted his massive head. You always have a story. Elara hesitated. The books in Oakhaven had been few and precious, and her father had been disinclined to spend a single coin on more. I could, perhaps, tell you one of mine, she suggested, the words barely a whisper. Yours? The beast went very still. That night began a profound transformation in their strange relationship. No longer was she merely a reciter of old tales, she was a creator, and the beast was her first and only true audience. He listened with an intensity that stole her breath. He questioned plot holes, debated character motivations, and suggested unexpected, brilliant twists. But why would the princess trust the knight after he was so cruel to her? He challenged one night. Because sometimes, Elara replied thoughtfully, we see beyond what people have done to who they truly are. The beast grew quiet at that. And you believe that? That people can change so fundamentally? I believe people can reveal who they truly were all along, she said softly. Sometimes cruelty is just armor. His golden eyes studied her with a new, searching intensity. You speak as if you know something of armor yourself. She did. The armor of indifference she had worn when her mate cast her aside, the armor of resignation when her father had offered her up like damaged goods. But she only smiled and continued her tale. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, stretching from the last rays of sunset until the first hint of dawn. Sometimes she would catch herself laughing at one of his dry, witty observations. Sometimes he would let out a low growl of pleasure at a particularly clever turn of phrase she had crafted. One night, the beast surprised her. I have something for you, he said, rising from his chair with a groan of shifting joints. He led her through a door hidden behind a tapestry she had never noticed before, revealing a circular chamber lined from floor to ceiling with books. A small writing desk sat by a tall arched window, stocked with fine parchment, sharpened quills, and pots of rich, dark ink. A library, Elara breathed, turning in a slow, disbelieving circle. For me, the beast said. You mentioned your father wouldn't buy you books, the beast said, his deep voice almost shy. I thought, perhaps, you might like to read new stories and write your own. Tears, hot and sudden, pricked at her eyes. No one had ever given her such a gift, something so perfectly, profoundly her. Thank you, she whispered, the words thick with emotion. From that night forward, their discussions became even richer. She would steal moments during the day to read, and at night they would debate philosophy, dissect character arcs, and argue over plot devices. Your heroine is too forgiving, he said one evening, as she read from a story she had just begun to write. No one forgives so easily. Perhaps she's learned that holding on to anger hurts her more than the person who wronged her, Elara replied. Or, perhaps, he countered gently, she's simply afraid of being alone again. She looked up from her pages, surprised by his insight. Maybe both. The beast leaned forward in his chair, his massive form eclipsing the firelight. Tell me about her, urged he, about why forgiveness comes so easily to someone who has been so deeply hurt. Elara set down her pages, her throat suddenly tight. She was cast aside by someone who was supposed to love her, told she was broken, worthless. When someone finally shows her a flicker of kindness, she's terrified of losing it. Why was she cast aside? The question hung in the air, heavy and fragile. Elara's hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. She couldn't give him what he wanted most, she said quietly.
the old shame coiling in her stomach. The beast's sharp intake of breath made her look up. His golden eyes blazed with something fierce and protective. "He was a fool," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. To cast aside someone so precious for something so far beyond her control. "Was he?" Elara asked, her own tears now threatening to fall. "In our world, what good is a woman who can't bear pups? What purpose does she serve?" "What purpose?" The beast rose, pacing to the window, his claws clicking softly on the stone. He turned back to her. "At least, you won't want to marry me now, I imagine, now that you know I'm truly as defective as they say." The beast whirled around, his massive form trembling with an intensity that shook the room. "Elara, I would count myself the most fortunate creature alive if you would have me. Child or no child, you are—" He stopped, as if catching himself before saying too much. "You are worth more than a kingdom of queens who possess everything but your gentle, brilliant heart," he finished quietly. Heat flooded Elara's cheeks, her heart hammering against her ribs. No one had ever spoken to him with such fervor, such unwavering conviction. I don't," she stammered, looking away from his burning gaze. She felt suddenly, acutely, of every inch of space between them. "You don't have to say such things just to be kind." "I am not being kind," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She ducked her head, overwhelmed by the weight of his regard, by the way he looked at her as if she were something precious, rather than something broken. For the first time in a very long time, Elara felt something akin to happiness. The castle that had once seemed a prison now felt closer to a sanctuary. Only one shadow darkened her growing contentment, the question that came every single night. "Will you be my wife?"
And each night, her voice, soft, with a regret that grew deeper each time, she would reply, "I am held by those who cannot touch me, broken by those who never speak me, and kept by those who never sought me. Kings command me, but I command fate. What am I?" At first, she had feared the consequences of her subtle, repeated refusal. Now, what truly haunted her were those intelligent golden eyes, flashing with raw, undeniable anguish each time she posed the riddle. She had even imagined herself saying yes, entertained the thought because he was her dearest, only friend, and no one had ever treated her so kindly. But the thought of those massive, misshapen limbs entwining with hers in the marriage bed made her stomach heave with a primal, instinctual terror she could not control. "What am I?" she would repeat, her voice a whisper. The beast would stay silent, his massive shoulders slumping in defeat, and the next day their strange, painful, beautiful dance would begin all over again. Chapter 6. The Truth in the Dawn. One morning, instead of being sent to scrub the chilly floors of the north wing, Elara was led by a sullen Griselda to a small chamber tucked away in a quiet corner of the castle. Inside stood a simple wooden desk with a comfortable chair, a tall stack of blank parchment, several sharpened quills, and a large pot of fresh ink. "His Majesty says you're to spend your days here now, readying yourself for your nightly duties," Griselda explained, her voice tight with disapproval. "Whatever keeps that thing entertained," she muttered, before leaving Elara alone with the precious, unbelievable gift of paper and time. Elara ran her fingers over the smooth, clean surface of the parchment, her heart swelling with a gratitude so profound it felt like an ache in her chest. No one had ever given her such a gift. In her village, paper was a scarce commodity, and ink a luxury her father would never have wasted on her frivolous stories. This was more than a gift. It was a validation. That night, Elara entered the beast's chambers quietly, clutching a stack of pages covered in her own careful script.
The usual words of greeting died on her lips as emotion swelled unexpectedly in her chest, hot and overwhelming. I wrote something different tonight," she said softly. "May I read it to you?" The beast settled his massive form across from her, the heavy chair groaning in protest beneath his weight. "Please." Her voice wavered as she began to read. Once, there lived a girl born without a wolf. In a village where everyone could shift, she alone remained human, trapped forever in a single skin. Elara paused, swallowing hard against the lump in her throat. Her father called her defective. Her sister pretended not to know her when others were watching. The village children threw stones and called her half-breed. The beast remained utterly motionless, only the intense, unwavering focus of his golden eyes betraying his rapt attention. Each night, Elara's voice grew steadier, stronger. She would escape into stories, creating worlds where she belonged, where being different wasn't a curse, but a kind of magic. She looked up from the page. No one ever asked to hear these stories. No one cared about the world she built, word by careful word. Those who rejected her for lacking a wolf were fools, the beast interrupted, his voice a low, rumbling growl. A wolf is nothing compared to a mind that creates worlds. Elara looked up, startled by the fierce conviction in his tone. Is that how the story ends?" he asked, his voice softer now. "I don't know yet," she admitted. A silence fell between them, charged with something new, something Elara couldn't quite name. "Today," she whispered, her gaze falling to her hands in her lap, "for the first time, someone gave my stories value. You asked the sovereign, a man who clearly despises you, to give me time and space to write. No one has ever—" Her voice broke, the emotion she'd held back for so long finally escaping. "No one has ever seen me before. Not until you." The beast's massive, clawed hands flexed and relaxed on the arms of his chair, as if he wished to reach for her but dared not. "I see nothing but you, Elara." The way he said her name, a name no one else had ever spoken with such reverence, sent a shiver down her spine. "Will you be my wife?" he asked, the familiar question laden with a new, unbearable weight. Elara's breath caught. Her heart, which had been soaring, now plummeted. The silence stretched between them, fragile and fraught. "Elara?" the beast prompted, his voice gentle. She looked at him, truly looked, at the massive, misshapen form, the twisted limbs, the scarred hide, and beyond that, to the mind she had come to know so intimately, the gentle wit, the thoughtful questions, the careful way he never, ever pushed her when she said no. The silence stretched on, heavy with unspoken possibility. I am held by those who cannot touch me, broken by those who never speak me, and kept by those who never sought me," she asked finally, her voice barely a whisper. There was a beat of silence. The beast met her eyes, and then his massive shoulders drooped in defeat. As she left his chambers that night, her heart felt heavier than it ever had before. Later, sleep eluded her. Elara stared into the oppressive darkness of her small room, her mind replaying every moment of her life before the castle, the crushing, suffocating loneliness of being the only one who couldn't shift, the painful silence that fell whenever she entered a room, the way her father's eyes would slide past her, as if looking directly at her defective daughter might somehow make her flawed existence more real. Then came the beast who spent hours just listening to her, the beast who had seen her worth and arranged a space for her to write. Tonight, he had called her storytelling more valuable than a wolf's strength. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. The beast asking about her protagonist's choice to forgive someone who had hurt her deeply. Because sometimes, she had answered, we see beyond what others have done to who they truly are. Wasn't that exactly what had happened between them? She had seen beyond the monstrous exterior to the kind, intelligent person within, and he had seen her, truly seen her, when no one else had ever bothered to look. Elara sat up suddenly, her heart pounding with a revelation so powerful it was like a physical blow. The truth crashed over her like a tidal wave. She loved him. Not with the cautious, careful affection one might feel for a dear friend, but with the soul-deep certainty of recognition, of finding the one person in the world who understood the unique language of her heart without need for translation. She had to tell him. Now, before the sun rose, before her courage failed her, before another day passed without him knowing that his question, at last, had a different answer. The castle corridors were silent and shadowed in the pre-dawn hours. When she reached the beast's chambers, the guard was slumped against the wall, snoring softly into his chest. She slipped past him without difficulty. Inside, the first faint morning light had just begun to filter through the heavy curtains. The beast lay asleep on his massive bed, and Elara approached quietly, her heart pounding a wild tattoo against her ribs. She would wake him, she decided, and she would tell him yes, she would be his wife. But then, the first true ray of sunlight sliced across the bed, and suddenly the beast's body contorted violently. A guttural groan of agony escaped him. His limbs twisted, fur receded into skin, and the horrifying sound of bones cracking and reshaping echoed in the silent room. Elara pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Where the beast had been, High Sovereign Kaelen now lay, his perfect, beautiful face relaxed in sleep, his bare chest rising and falling in a steady, even rhythm. The contrast was breathtaking, from grotesque monster to divine beauty in a matter of moments. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers hovering just above his cheek. His eyes snapped open. For one unguarded heartbeat, he smiled at her, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his severe features into something so achingly beautiful it stole her breath. Then awareness dawned. His gaze darted to the sunlight streaming through the window, then back to her horrified face. The smile died. "You weren't supposed to see this," he said, his voice hollow and dead. "You're majestic," she whispered, her mind reeling.
Kaelen sat up slowly, his shock replaced by a profound, weary resignation. "A witch's curse," he explained, his gaze fixed on the wall, refusing to meet hers. By day, the cold, perfect king everyone fears. By night, the hideous monster everyone pities. Neither form is truly me. The curse will only be broken when I find a love stronger than that which is born for a king. Or, in other words, he added, a bitter twist to his lips, when someone falls in love with the beast, knowing nothing of the king within. "I came to say yes," Elara blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in her desperation. "Before I saw this, I was going to accept your proposal." "Enough," he cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. "Now that you know, whatever you felt is tainted. You've seen both sides. Your feelings are for a king, not a beast." "But I didn't know when I decided," Elara began, stepping closer. "It doesn't matter anymore." The sovereign, her Kaelen, her beast, turned his back to her, his shoulders rigid. "You should go." By that afternoon, Elara found herself in a carriage, watching the beautiful, terrible white marble castle recede into the distance. Chapter 7. The Royal Wedding. A year passed in the small cottage by the forest's edge. The seasons turned, a relentless, indifferent cycle. Wildflowers bloomed in the meadow and withered. The leaves on the ancient oaks turned to gold and fire, then fell, leaving the branches bare and skeletal against a gray winter sky, only to grow anew in the spring. Elara had everything she had once dreamed of: a quiet room with east-facing windows that caught the morning sun, a small writing desk, shelves lined with books, and a deep, inconsolable misery. A constant hollow ache resided in her chest, a void that no amount of written words could fill. She wrote prolifically, filling page after page with tales of cursed princes, of misunderstood beasts, of a love that transcended physical form. But each story felt incomplete, because without him there to question her plots, to challenge her character motivations, to let out a low rumble of laughter at her unexpected twists, the words felt hollow and dead on the page. The folk of the nearby village were kind enough, if distant. They whispered about her, calling her the sovereign's woman, the strange, quiet creature who had been sent away from the castle with a generous pension and a haunted look in her eyes. Isolation was nothing new to Elara, but this solitude cut deeper than any she had known before. For now, she knew what it meant to be truly seen, to be truly heard, and then to lose it all. The news came on a late summer's day, carried by the baker's wife, as Elara purchased her weekly loaf of bread. "You've heard, I suppose," the woman asked, her eyes bright with the gleam of gossip, "about the royal wedding?" Elara's heart stumbled in her chest. "Wedding?" "Oh, yes. The High Sovereign is to marry Princess Isolde of the Sunstone Dominion. A powerful alliance, they say." The woman leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The ceremony will be held in the town square next week, a public spectacle, so all the kingdom might witness. Everyone is invited." That night, Elara stood before the small silvered mirror in her room and made her decision. She would go. Not to disrupt, not to plead or make a scene, but simply to see him one last time, to fix the image of him in her memory before he belonged to another. The morning of the wedding dawned painfully clear and bright, as if the heavens themselves were blessing the union. Elara dressed carefully in her finest gown, a simple dress of deep forest green, but finer than anything she had ever owned in her Oakhaven life. By midday, the capital's main square had transformed into a spectacle of royal extravagance. Banners in royal blue and gold hung from every building. Garlands of summer flowers were draped across makeshift pavilions. Guards in gleaming, polished armor stood at attention, their expressions stern and unreadable beneath their helmets. Elara found a place along the edge of the immense crowd, half hidden behind a broad-shouldered farmer and his family. From here, she could see, without being seen, or so she hoped. The assembled nobility arrived first, a dazzling parade of shimmering silks, glittering jewels, and carefully arranged, predatory smiles. Then came the bride's procession. Princess Isolde was everything Elara was not: tall, imperious, with the confident, effortless grace of one born to power and command. The crowd sighed in collective appreciation. Elara's throat tightened. Of course, he would choose such a mate. Beautiful, powerful, a woman worthy of a high sovereign. Had the princess somehow succeeded where she had failed? Had Isolde broken the curse that bound him? The sun had not yet set. There was no way to know for certain. A hush fell over the square as the royal fanfare sounded. High Sovereign Kaelen appeared at the far end of the aisle that had been created through the crowd. He was resplendent in royal blue and silver, his dark hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. He moved with the fluid, powerful grace she remembered so well, head held high, shoulders squared, every inch the perfect, untouchable ruler. But Elara saw what others did not. She saw the slight, almost imperceptible tension around his eyes, the careful, deliberate blankness of his expression. She saw the way his hands curled into tight fists at his sides before he consciously forced them to relax. This was not merely the cold, perfect king the crowd adored. This was her beast, the one who listened to her stories, who had given her paper and quills, who had asked her, again and again, with growing desperation, to be his wife. As Kaelen took his place at the altar, waiting for his bride to join him,
Something inside Elara's chest cracked open. She knew him, truly knew him, in a way this princess, with her perfect hair and her perfect lineage, never ever could. She knew his quick wit, his surprising capacity for gentleness. She knew how his golden eyes lit up at a clever plot twist, how he grew utterly still when deeply moved by a story's turn. Near her, a burly man shifted his weight, drawing her attention. Something about his movement seemed off, too controlled, too deliberate. His eyes weren't on the ceremony, they were scanning the placement of the royal guards, calculating. With a start, Elara realized he wasn't watching the wedding at all, but studying the security arrangements. Across the square, she spotted another man doing the same, his hand resting too casually near a concealed weapon at his belt. A chill ran down her spine. Something was terribly wrong. The royal officiant began the traditional vows. Elara watched through a shimmering veil of unshed tears as Kaelen stood rigid, his face a perfect, unreadable mask of composure. Then, suddenly, inexplicably, his gaze lifted from his bride and swept across the vast crowd. Their eyes met. For one shattering heartbeat, his perfect composure was utterly destroyed. Pain, raw and unguarded, flashed across his features. His face paled, his lips parted slightly as if to speak her name. Then, with a visible, shuddering effort, he tore his gaze away, returning his attention to the princess beside him. Elara forced her lips into a trembling, watery smile, hoping he had seen it, hoping he understood that she wished him happiness, even as her own heart crumbled to dust within her chest. The vows continued. The sun inched lower in the sky. The suspicious men in the crowd shifted subtly, moving into new strategic positions. And then, chaos erupted. Chapter 8. A Love Stronger Than a Crown. The first scream split the festive air like lightning striking a dead tree. Then came the horrifying clash of steel on steel, the guttural snarls of shifting wolves, and the thundering of armored boots as royal guards rushed to form a protective circle around their sovereign and his bride. "Protect His Majesty!" the commander's voice rose above the din, a rallying cry in the sudden chaos. Guards surrounded Princess Isolde, whisking her away through a side street toward the safety of the castle. But Kaelen remained. He drew his sword, the polished blade flashing in the late afternoon sun, a deadly extension of his arm. All around Elara, the crowd surged, people shoving and pushing in a blind panic. Someone knocked her hard, and she fell to the ground. From her position on the hard cobblestones, the battle took on a surreal, nightmarish quality. Some of the attackers shifted mid-fight, their bodies contorting as thick fur erupted from their skin. Massive, snarling wolves, their fangs bared, leapt into the fray. Royal guards transformed to meet them, the conflict escalating from a sword fight to a primal, bloody battle of beasts.
But Kaelen fought with steel alone. He moved with a deadly, fluid grace that was both terrifying and beautiful. It was the same economy of movement, the same raw power she had seen in the beast. Different forms, she realized with a jolt, but the same soul. An archer, perched on a nearby roof, took aim at the sovereign's unprotected back. Without a thought, without a single moment of hesitation, Elara burst from the relative safety of the panicked crowd. She raced across the blood-slicked cobblestones, a desperate, hopeless cry on her lips, and collided with Kaelen just as an arrow whistled through the air where he had stood only a second before. They crashed to the ground together. His eyes, those familiar, intelligent eyes she had gazed into for so many nights, widened in shock. "Elara," he breathed, her name a pained whisper. "You were about to be shot," she replied breathlessly, gesturing toward the rooftop. Kaelen shoved her behind him, his body a shield. "Go, please," he urged, his voice tight with desperation. His commander appeared at his side, blood streaking his face. "Your Majesty, the sun! You must retreat now." Elara glanced westward. The sun hung low on the horizon, a bloated, bloody red orb mere minutes from disappearing completely. The curse wasn't broken. The commander tugged at Kaelen's arm. "My lord, there's no time." A massive wolf, one of the attackers, lunged at Elara, knocking her back to the ground. Hot, foul breath washed over her face as sharp teeth snapped inches from her throat. She twisted, fighting, but the wolf's immense weight pinned her down. Another attacker, still in human form, stood beside the wolf. "Stand down, Your Majesty," he called out, his voice distorted with a sneer, "or watch her die." Kaelen froze, his sword half raised. The commander grabbed his arm again, his face a mask of frantic terror. "My lord, the sun, you must go." "Let her go," Kaelen commanded, his voice deadly calm, each word laced with ice. The sun touched the horizon, its lower edge seeming to dissolve into the distant hills. "My sovereign," the commander pleaded, his voice breaking. "There is no time." Kaelen shook him off, his eyes never leaving Elara. Something shifted in his expression, a decision made. "Take her," the attacker growled, dragging Elara backward by her hair. "No!" Kaelen roared, lunging forward just as the last sliver of the sun vanished. He stumbled, a cry of pure agony torn from his throat. His sword clattered to the cobblestones. His body contorted, the fine wedding clothes straining and ripping at the seams. Gasps and screams of horror rose from the crowd as nobles and commoners alike witnessed their perfect sovereign's transformation. His spine arched unnaturally, bones cracking and shifting with sickening snaps. His handsome face elongated, teeth sharpening, jaw unhinging. Coarse fur erupted across his skin, interspersed with grotesque scales. His elegant fingers curved into razor-sharp claws. The crowd recoiled in terror. Princess Isolde, who had been fighting her guards to return to the square, froze at the sight, her face draining of all color. But Kaelen paid them no mind. His focus, his entire world, was on Elara. The beast that was Kaelen lunged himself at her captor with a ferocity that was terrifying to behold. There was no hesitation, no concern for who witnessed his monstrous form, only pure, untempered rage at the threat to Elara. The attacker released her, shifting fully to meet this new threat, but he was no match for the raw power of Kaelen's beast form. Around them, the battle paused, as even the assassins gaped at the impossible revelation. In that lull, the royal guards regained control, driving back the remaining rebels as Kaelen tore into their leader. It ended quickly. The attacking alpha lay dead in a pool of his own blood. And in the center of the town square stood the beast, massive, grotesque, covered in blood that was not his own. His golden eyes swept the horrified crowd. He staggered, a pained growl escaping his throat. Blood seeped from a deep wound in his shoulder where an attacker's arrow had found its mark. His massive legs trembled, and he swayed. Elara approached him, her beast, her sovereign. She felt no fear. "You're hurt," she said softly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her hand reaching out to touch his furred cheek. "I'm so sorry they saw. This is all my fault." The beast shook his massive head, a low growl of denial in his chest. "I don't care what they saw, what they think." He winced as a spasm of pain lanced through him. "As long as you're safe." Elara placed her hands on either side of his monstrous muzzle, forcing him to look at her. "I love you," she said, her voice clear and strong in the sudden silence. Something shifted in the air, a charge like lightning about to strike. A soft light began to emanate from within him, pulsing brighter with each of his labored breaths. The transformation began again. Fur receded, bones shifted, the grotesque features melted away. But unlike his usual painful, violent transformation, this one seemed gentler, more peaceful. When it finished, Kaelen stood before her in his human form, though the sun had long set. His wedding finery hung in tatters, but his body was whole, the deep arrow wound in his shoulder completely healed. I don't understand," he whispered, looking at his hands, then at her. "The curse." "Only when you find a love stronger than that born for a king will you be free," Elara quoted softly. "That's what the witch told you, isn't it?" she continued gently. "It wasn't about finding someone who could love the beast more than the king. It was about you loving someone else more than you loved being king."
Understanding dawned on Kaelen's face. "When I chose to save you over preserving my secret," he began, "you showed that you loved me more than your crown, more than your pride," she finished for him. That's what broke the curse. Around them, the crowd murmured, their fear slowly turning to awe. The princess had vanished. His commander approached cautiously, disbelief and wonder written across his blood-stained features. But Kaelen saw only Elara. In the middle of the ruined wedding, surrounded by the wreckage of his old life, he pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, her hands reaching up to frame his face, the face she had known in two forms, the soul she had recognized in both. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "Beast and sovereign, both parts of me love you." Elara pressed closer, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart against hers. The crowd, the chaos, the blood, all of it receded, until there was only this, two people who had seen beyond form and fear to the undeniable truth of each other's hearts. 1 year later, the royal ballroom glittered with the light of 1,000 candles. Across the polished marble floor, both humans and shifters danced together, an unprecedented harmony that was still a source of wonder to many. Queen Elara stood at the edge of the revelry, watching her mate move through the crowd. No longer did fear and whispers follow in his wake. Instead, genuine smiles and respectful bows greeted High Sovereign Kaelen as he stopped to speak with each of his guests. So much had changed in a single year. The castle that had once been a place of shadowed terror now opened its doors to all. The servants no longer cowered. The rigid hierarchy that had kept humans as second-class citizens beneath wolves had dissolved under their joint, compassionate rule. After the shocking revelation on his wedding day, many truths had come to light. He had never been truly cruel, merely desperate to keep his curse hidden, preferring to be feared than to be closely observed. Those servants who had attended his special guest and never returned had simply been relocated to distant villages with generous pensions, their silence bought to protect his secret. The truth behind the curse itself had spread quickly. How the witch, scorned by his arrogant younger self, had split him in two, forcing him to live half his life as the thing he feared and despised most, a beast who could never be respected, only feared. A fitting punishment for a prince who had once valued appearance and power above all else. But the breaking of the curse had transformed more than just Kaelen. It had transformed the kingdom itself.
And then there was the miracle, the one that still made Elara's heart race with a quiet, profound wonder. 3 months after their own quiet wedding ceremony, she had felt the first, impossible flutter of life within her womb. The royal physicians had been baffled. The same woman they had once pronounced irrevocably barren now carried not one, but 2 healthy babes. The prince and princess, a boy with his father's eyes and a girl with her mother's thoughtful smile, now slept peacefully in the royal nursery above. Elara liked to think it was love that had worked the miracle. Her husband had married her knowing she might never give him an heir, had chosen her despite what the world had called her greatest failing. Perhaps that kind of love, pure, unconditional, transformative, had been powerful enough to heal what everyone, including herself, had believed was permanently broken. Elara paused as she neared her husband, overhearing his conversation with a visiting diplomat. "A riddle, Your Majesty," the diplomat was saying with a chuckle. "They say you're quite skilled at them." "I do enjoy a good puzzle," Kaelen admitted with a warm smile. "Very well. I am held by those who cannot touch me, broken by those who never speak me, and kept by those who never sought me. Kings command me, but I command fate. What am I?" Elara froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her riddle, the one she had posed on that first terrifying night when she had been so certain she was about to die. Kaelen's eyes flickered toward her over the diplomat's shoulder, a small, secret smile playing at his lips. "That's a simple one," he replied, his gaze holding hers. "A promise." The diplomat laughed, impressed, and moved on to another conversation.
Elara approached her husband, unable to hide her surprise. "You knew the answer," she said quietly, "all this time." Kaelen took her hand, bringing it to his lips and kissing her knuckles. "Since the very first night you asked it of me. But you said you didn't know." "I didn't want to force you to keep your promise, curse or no curse," he said, his voice low and intimate. He drew her onto the dance floor, their bodies moving together in a familiar, perfect sync. "Your yes had to be freely given, or it meant nothing." "I love you," he murmured against her temple, "my storyteller, my queen." "And I love you," she replied, her head resting against his chest, "my beast, my sovereign." One soul in perfect harmony at last.